Hello, everyone. My name is Jyoti Anchalkar and I will be your host today. Thank you for taking time out to attend today's webinar. I'm part of eBay Seller Education team, which is responsible for conducting webinars for training sellers like you about various eBay processes and best practices. These webinars are designed to help you grow your business and meet customer expectations. We hope that you will benefit from these webinars and apply the best practices in your business. Join our live webinars through the webinar calendar on export.ebay.com and get your questions answered in real time. The topic for today's webinar is analyzing buyer feedback and implementing best practices. And in this webinar, we will try to understand why it is important to analyze the feedback left by your buyer, irrespective of the rating, and how to implement the best practices. Our webinar agenda is as follows. What is buyer feedback analysis? Why is feedback important? Feedback calculation, managing automation preferences, feedback revision and timelines, categorizing buyer feedback, deciding on negative or neutral feedback removal, and the best practices. So let's understand what is buyer feedback analysis. But before we dive into analyzing the buyer feedback, let's first understand what exactly is feedback. So feedback is a rating or a review that your buyer leaves for you, which is their way of expressing their experience with you as a seller, for the product that they have purchased or the service that you have provided. On eBay, feedback is one of the best way or one of the ways through which buyers share their uh, satisfaction or dissatisfaction with a particular transaction. And that is why this particular feedback plays a vital role in shaping your reputation as a seller. On eBay, a buyer can leave a positive, negative, neutral feedback along with a comment and a detailed seller rating for their seller. Whereas as a seller, you can only leave positive feedback. So when a buyer leaves a positive feedback, he's letting you know that he's happy with the purchase, the product, and the service that they have received. When a buyer leaves a neutral feedback, it's their experience has not been that great. It's neither good neither bad. And that is why they're leaving you a neutral feedback. Whereas a negative feedback is a clear way of letting you know that I am dissatisfied with the purchase or the service or the shipping that I had on the transaction that was done between you as a seller and me as a buyer. So it's a way of me letting you know about my dissatisfaction. So let's talk about what is feedback analysis. So feedback analysis is actually getting to the root cause of why a buyer has left you a negative, neutral, or a positive feedback, which helps you to understand and provide better solutions to your buyers. Why is feedback important? So before getting into analysis, it's important to understand why feedback is important. So feedback matters a lot because a positive feedback builds up a good reputation for you as a seller, whereas a negative feedback can harm your reputation, right? Feedback helps other buyers who would want to purchase the products that you have listed to evaluate your reliability as to how much can they rely on you as a seller and your commitment to deliver quality with regards to the product and the services, right? Now, although feedback is not a way to measure your seller performance, that is your seller standards, but uh, when we talk about feedback, feedback can help you get better visibility as to how you are performing when it comes to providing satisfaction to your buyers. Because feedback is one of the most critical tools for communication between buyers and sellers and is of utmost importance to build transparency and trust for the transactions that are done on eBay. So, Feedback is important because it lets you know and lets you know as a business as to what can change, what must improve, and what actions are required to retain and grow your business. Talking about feedback calculation, the calculation on eBay about feedback is very simple. Total positives divided by total negatives and total positives that you have received in the last 12 months, which means in the feedback calculation, neutral is not taken into consideration. The next thing about eBay is one buyer can do multiple transactions with the same seller at multiple occasions and can leave feedback for those multiple transactions. However, that feedback, or eBay calls it as repeat feedback, would be taken into consideration only if the transaction or the item was bought or sold in different weeks. eBay calculates week from Monday to Sunday. So, which means at any given time between a Monday to a Sunday, there are multiple transactions done by the same buyer, and the buyer left you more positives than negatives. Your feedback score will increase by 1. If you receive the same number of positives and negatives from the same buyer in the same week, there is no impact on your feedback score. Whereas if you receive multiple or a higher number of negatives than the positives from the same buyer in or the seller in the same week, that is Monday to Sunday, your feedback score will decrease by 1. Now, that's about feedback calculation. On your eBay account or on a listing, the feedback score is visible. Now, we understand that sellers may not have that time to leave feedback every time for their buyers. Hence, we allow our sellers to set up automation rules within their eBay account, which is a part of your Seller Hub page. So simply go to Seller Hub, click on Orders tab, and on the Orders tab on the left hand side, you should be able to see the option that talks about Automate Feedback. So simply click on Automate Feedback, and you would be directed to the page where you can choose to leave a feedback automatically for your buyer either when the buyer has paid or when the buyer has paid and left you a positive feedback. And plus, you can add around 10 comments, of course, positive comments, so that the system can automatically pick up any comment when the system is leaving feedback for your buyers. So, if you've not yet automated feedback in your eBay account, please do it right away. We spoke about buyer feedback analysis. We spoke about what is feedback, why it is important. We spoke about feedback calculation, and now we spoke about managing automation preferences. Now it's time to understand a little bit about feedback revision. First and foremost, a seller is the only one who can ask his buyer to revise the feedback. Second, feedback revision can only happen for a negative or a neutral feedback. Third, it is only the buyer who can make these revisions. So once a request is made and the buyer fails to take action, the request is not going to be considered, and it's going to reduce the amount of requests that you have in your account. Because as a seller, you get 5 feedback revision forms per calendar year, which is granted on the 1st of January, and 5 more for every 1,000 feedback that you receive on a rolling of 12-month period. Now, talking about feedback revision, before you send a feedback revision to your buyer, it is important that you connect with your buyer and resolve the issue for which the buyer had left you a negative or neutral, and then proceed to send a feedback revision request. You can send a feedback revision request between 30 days from the time the buyer left you a negative or a neutral feedback. Now, once you send the feedback revision request, the buyer would have 10 days, which includes the weekends as well. So it's normal 10 days to accept or decline. And when the buyer chooses to revise your feedback, the buyer can choose to revise the rating, that's the original rating, the comment, and the detailed seller rating as well. But once again, only one revision request can be made per transaction. So if you do make a revision request and the buyer does not take any action, that revision request is considered as gone from your account. Now we move to the most important part of today's webinar, that is categorizing buyer feedback. Now, before I explain this particular presentation, let me just help you walk through why it is important to categorize the feedback that you have received from your buyers. So a buyer can leave a positive, negative, or a neutral feedback along with a comment and a detailed seller rating. But why it is important to categorize the feedback that you have received from your buyers? Categorizing feedback received from buyers can be crucial for many ways. For you as a seller, it allows you to better understand your performance, identify trends, and take some targeted actions to improve your business, right? So, by systematically categorizing the feedback that your buyer has left for you, you as a seller can quickly pinpoint areas that require attention. You can prioritize issues and enhance the overall customer experience, right? So, how does categorization help you? It helps you to identify areas of improvement on product, shipping and delivery, customer service, product quality. It also helps you understand on the overall satisfaction, take necessary steps to you know to understand when multiple buyers are complaining about late deliveries, right? So analyzing or categorizing your feedback is going to help you do much more. So as you see on the screen, this particular section is divided into two parts. The first part talks about correct and valid feedback, and the second part talks about invalid or incorrect feedback. Now how to read this is: correct and valid feedback means in which scenarios does eBay consider the feedback received by you as a seller, when it is negative or neutral, is correct and valid, and we would not be supporting you in removing that. The next part talks about incorrect or invalid feedback. Now, this is where eBay feels that this kind of a feedback is not correct for you to be received, and we will support you. Now, let's talk about each of these sections under correct and valid feedback. If you have received a feedback talking about the product, right? And we find out that uh, this particular feedback that you have received a negative or a neutral feedback or for the product that the buyer has left for you is because of some kind of revisions that you've done in your listings. The buyer is stating that the item was missing the item specification, the item titles were misguiding, or the images that were added were unclear, the description was either incomplete or incorrect, and very importantly we see that there is repeat feedback for the same product from different buyers, right? Now if it is product related, it is going to be considered as correct, right? Talking about shipping related, so any comment that the buyer leaves you for a negative or neutral is with regards to the shipping. For example, seller not shipping the items, seller missing on the handling time, providing or choosing incorrect shipping services, improper labeling and packaging, wrong shipping charges by the seller, and once again, there are shipping issues for the same product or from different buyers or from the same buyer. The next one, if the feedback, that is the negative or neutral feedback left by the buyer, is for a product, service, or post sales related issues, such as the seller not accepting returns on time, the refund request not being responded on time, the seller not providing post sales service, and not even resolving product issues, if that is what the buyer states in the comment, eBay will consider that feedback as valid because the buyer is expressing his views, his experience. Any kind of a comment or a rating that talks about the seller not fulfilling his communication his commitment on communication, such as seller not responding to queries on time, providing misleading or incorrect communication. If that is what the feedback states, it will stay. The negative or neutral feedback will stay. However, in situations like a rating that is received as negative, but the buyer has put up positive comments, for eBay, that's an incorrect or invalid feedback, right? If the comments are totally about a separate transaction and not for the item that was purchased, then for eBay, it is an incorrect or invalid feedback left by the buyer. If the buyer has left the feedback, but those statements are giving no clarity on why he has left you a negative or neutral, and if there is inappropriate language used in the feedback comment, eBay will consider that feedback as invalid or incorrect. So, this is again a repeat of what you have seen in the previous slide. Now, when can you decide that you would want eBay to help you on removal of a negative or neutral feedback? So when you make a request to eBay about the removal of a negative or neutral feedback, please remember these points. When will eBay consider that you as a seller are at fault and you as a seller are not at fault? So for situations like buyer didn't pay and an unpaid item case is open, the delay or the negative feedback that the buyer has left is because of an eBay site or a program issue. If the EMBG, that is the eBay money back guarantee case or appeal, was closed in your favor, because of systemic delays in shipping and communication, we understand that the seller is not at fault. Say buyer leaving you inappropriate feedback or a negative rating with positive comment, irrelevant feedback, buyer abusing the feedback system, and there is seller protection that needs to be given because the situation was beyond your control. In these situations, eBay will consider that the seller is not at fault and we will help you. Right now, to help, what you need to do is, first of all, if you feel that's an unfair negative or neutral feedback, send a feedback revision request to the buyer. Or what you can do is you can contact the global customer support by going to ebay.com and by clicking on help and contact and then clicking on contact us. That way your message will come to the eBay customer support team and they can definitely help you. But when you feel that you are not at fault, it is important that you appeal for the negative or neutral removal between 90 days from the date of transaction. Now, when will eBay consider you being at fault as a seller? Well, if the comment clearly states that the product is significantly not as described, if the comment clearly states and we know that it was shipped to a wrong address or the product was not delivered or the product was shipped after editing the listing or the feedback removal appeal was done post 90 days of transaction, we would clearly assume or rather it is understood that the seller is at fault. If the feedback involves comments that state that there are parts missing or there are product related issue or the seller has missed on the handling and estimated delivery date timelines, it is the seller who is at fault, right? So coming to the best practices how should you be avoiding any kind of a negative neutral feedback, that is NNFP, and how you should be enhancing your buyer experience. First and foremost, please ensure that you're adding detailed item descriptions and specifications to avoid any ambiguity to your buyer about the product. Provide better product description and images. Ensure that your product details have uniformity across the entire listing. Please always ensure that you're doing a quality check before shipping the item. For example, ensuring that the product is clean, it's nicely wiped and it is new and clean, right? uh, Always check the shipping address with your buyer, as to at times there are buyers who provide incorrect shipping address, and that may lead to item either not being shipped or the transaction getting cancelled. Print right shipping labels. Use trackable end-to-end shipping services. Ensure that your items are shipped on time. You are responding to the buyer in a timely manner. Very importantly, connecting with the buyer to correct the feedback rating. To avoid late shipments, please ensure that you're checking the transaction dates. And last but not the least, ensuring that you stay updated on the eBay seller updates. And with that, that is all for today's webinar topic. We hope that the information shared today has been useful to you. Do keep joining us for our forthcoming training webinars. Keep checking the webinar calendar on export.ebay.com. Before we wrap up, make sure you hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. You'll gain access to all our latest videos packed with tips and tricks to streamline your eBay selling experience. Don't miss out. The links are mentioned in the description. We will see you soon in the next webinar. Goodbye.